Hi everyone, I'd like to welcome you today for our next class, and it's, as mentioned last week, it's pre-recorded, so I'll lead the prayers. Sangye chodang soke chognam la janchu badu dagni kapsu chi dage jin soge peso nam ki drola panche sangye drupa shok. Sangye chodang soke chognam la janchu badu dagni kapsu chi dagi jin soge peso nam ki drola panche sangye drupa shok. Sangye chodang soke chugnam la jangchu badu dagni kapsu chi dagi chonenge peso namgi drola panche sangye drupa shok. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop or a bubble. Like a dream, a flash of lightning or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. By this merit may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, our harmful deeds. And may beings buffeted by the waves of birth, old age, sickness and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. Heart of the perfection of wisdom, I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagawan was dwelling on a mass of Vulture's Mountain in Rajgir, together with a great community of monks and a great community of Bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration of the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly, beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form is also other, not other than emptiness. In the same way, feelings, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristics, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visible form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no eye element, and so on up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, or path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, Bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared: Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgati Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that, it is like that. One should practice a profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the God world of gods, humans, Asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. Praise to Manjushri. Homage to my Guru and Protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text, symbolic of his seeing all of all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as a sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of a father for his only son, all creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dharma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance. You whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages, achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning, I bow down to you, Manjushri. Oma Rapat Sanati. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Outer Mandala. By the virtue of offering to you, assembly of Buddhas, visualized before me, this mandala built on a base resplendent with flowers, saffron water, and incense, adorned with Mount Meru and the 4 continents, as well as the sun and the moon, may all sentient beings share in its good effects. Please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings to be released from the 3 poisons, for I am offering without attachment my body, enemies, friends, and strangers, and all objects which are possessions, which are the objects of my greed, ignorance, and hatred. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Last week, I dealt somewhat extensively with Shantideva's verse, quote, in doing that which by nature is not unwholesome, both for the sake of myself and other sentient beings, I shall always hold my mind fast, acting like an apparition with no sense of self. In a playful manner, Stephen called it riffing, a musical reference given the Barry Manilow example I presented. The investigation involved exploring, rather confronting, the problem of coherency, even in everyday terms, that arise if things exist inherently as they instinctively appear to and are held by innate self-grasping ignorance to be. We could similarly consider examples of the use of extremely loud music by AC/DC and Metallica, as well as theme songs from children's television shows like Barney and His Friends, as torture instruments employed by military interrogators in Guantanamo Bay and other prison groups in Afghanistan, Iraq, and so forth. We may even have more recent applications pertaining to current wars, hence the recognised military term, musical torture. I'm still being playful here, but the examples have indeed suddenly taken a sinister turn. but the point remains the same. If such sounds were inherently attractive and delightful to the ear, then they would be absolutely fabulous in all situations. This would include even at extremely loud volume. Shantideva in chapter 9, verse 88 says, if suffering itself is truly real, what is joy? Why is joy not altogether quenched thereby? If pleasure's real, then why will pleasant tastes not comfort and amuse a man in agony? So read that again. If suffering itself is truly real, why is joy not altogether quenched thereby? And if pleasure's real, then why will pleasant tastes not comfort and amuse a man in agony? So Shantideva is presenting the same scenario here, but applied now to suffering. If suffering were truly real, then how does it not overwhelm all experiences of joy? The reason, if it was truly existent, it could never cease to be, even if joy were being ostensibly experienced. Otherwise, in other words, suffering would have to be present there. The same for pleasure. If pleasure was truly existent, then how come it would not serve to delight the prisoner, even in the very midst of their being subject to excruciating torture in the military prison? So you can appreciate here, even at a glance, that yes, I deliberately engaged in comically intended riffing, but it is also a carefully considered and somewhat extended example of how we are to employ the famous Madhyamika logical analyses, the precise critical probing into the viability of things, including ourselves, other people and things, all other things, according to the predicate, if they existed from their own side, independently of depending upon causes and conditions, parts, and conceptual imputation. So if they did exist independently of those, what consequences, both experientially, if we can even still talk about experience, and would both experientially and logically follow? What consequences would follow? This analytical playfulness, therefore, involves stretching our analysis to touch the objects that appear to us during the ordinary course of the ordinary day. But to do this in a meaningful way, and also so that we might not be led astray, or rather lead ourselves astray, we must be able to distinguish what an ultimate analysis in this context means. Ultimate analysis referring to that analysis of the final mode of existence of things. So Thupten Jinpa says, Tsongkhapa distinguishes between two distinct domains of discourse, namely, that which pertains to the reality of our everyday world of convention, and that which pertains to the ultimate ontological status of things and events. Accordingly, Tsongkhapa conceives of two distinct categories of discourse and analysis that correspond to these two domains. So it is critical that we separate these two domains out. We have to be able to see them both separately and clearly. So A conventional analysis would therefore involving whether or not Ross has left his studio, which I'm currently in order to go out shopping for something to eat at dinner. So we're trying to establish that fact. His shoes are still here, must be somewhere, etc., etc. An ultimate analysis, on the other hand, would be examining what is the ultimate ontological status of Ross's going, or the ultimate ontological status of Ross's dinner, etc. These two types of analysis, therefore, are distinct and do not overlap. They do not seep or leak into each other. Put another way, they have select individual aims. This is especially the case as a reality, the things of our everyday world are established validly in terms of conventional terms, analogy, or systems, and are not to be themselves refuted by a wisdom analysing suchness. Or we might say that because the things of our everyday world are established validly in conventional terms, they fall beyond or outside the specific purview of an analysis into the ultimate mode of existence. So the stress here is on the qualifier ultimate, into their ultimate mode, their existence. Nor are conventionally established things suitable to be themselves refuted by a wisdom analysing suchness. Because if they were found somehow suitable, an analysis of suchness leading to a realisation of those things' emptiness would require the annihilation of the things of the ordinary world. It would wipe them out, if you like. Our realisation of emptiness would cause their obliteration, in other words. In short, conventional reality is to be left unharmed, unbruised by applying an ultimate analysis. This is because conventionally existent things are not established by an ultimate analysis, which, as I mentioned before, is exploring, investigating the ontological mode of things, ontological referring to the way in which they exist in reality. Rather, they are established according to the conventional operations of the world. That is, the world of ordinary discourse. Ross is coming to dinner now. Ross is growing old. Ross is attempting to convey a difficult philosophical distinction here, etc., etc. Tsongkhapa, in the Essence of Eloquence, says, I quote, although the objects of conventional reality, such as form, sound, and so on, exist, they can never be established through a reasoning process that examines whether or not they have an intrinsic nature. He continues, our master Chandrakirti has repeatedly stated that they, form, sound, and so on, are not susceptible to ultimate or critical analysis. If the reasoning that determines whether or not intrinsic beings exist can negate them, the objects of the conventional world, one can say that they are susceptible to analysis. However, this point is categorically rejected in the writings of this master Chandrakirti. End of quote. Which is to say, the objects of conventional reality cannot be established by an ultimate analysis. Nor is their existence as conventional objects in the world challenged or threatened by an ultimate analysis. Why not? Because, as I mentioned before, as merely imputed conventionally existent things, they exist beyond the purview, the realm of investigation of an ultimate analysis, which is only intent on determining whether or not things exist inherently, not whether or not they exist conventionally. This is a huge difference. The criteria of whether or not something exists conventionally is the work, the normal work of the ordinary world. This is because how things conventionally exist is a production of the ordinary world. My parents labelled that little boy, baby boy, Ross, and henceforth was known as Ross through a network of consensual operations in society, starting with my parents and my immediate family. In the very simplest terms, we are to accept the operational domain of ordinary, conventional, mundane discourse. This is not being challenged by an investigation into the ultimate mode of reality of things. Ordinary, conventional, mundane discourse works perfectly well, thank you, on that ordinary, conventional level. We build what we call a table and happily put what we call and know as our dinner plates upon it. It all works fine. There is no philosophical axe to grind here. Indeed, to go there would be unnecessarily vexatious, just making problems for no purpose. But if we do go further to ask whether the table exists from its own side, independently of being merely labelled by conventional terms and concepts, as is being hallucinated and projected by innate self-grasping, ignorance, then this is what Jimpa is calling an ontological inquiry. And we immediately step into another order of analysis here, that which has been called an ultimate analysis. An ultimate analysis is therefore to be carefully understood, to have a unique purview, a particular exclusive sphere or domain of operation. This might be illustrated as follows. Tsongkhapa says, quote, "There is not the slightest difference between the two following statements. Dharmadatta sees a form and a substantially real Dharmadatta sees a form. Insofar as nothing substantial can be found as the referent of the subjective terms when we search for it. However," Tsongkhapa continues, "if we deny the first seeing, we go against conventional knowledge. In contrast, the second kind of seeing is something that can be negated by valid knowledge." So I realise it's getting a little bit complicated, but I'll attempt to briefly unpack it. But anyway, to continue the quote, "Therefore, the two are utterly different terms, are utterly different in terms of whether or not each exists on the conventional level." That's the crucial point here. The reason for this is that Substantial reality is such that if it exists, it must be found when sought through analysis. And when it cannot be found, thus, one can conclude that it is negated by reasoning. Whereas in the case of mere existence, there is no, and this is referring to those conventional things, Ross, tables, dinner, and so forth, there is no need for it to be findable when sought analytically. And its non-findability through analysis cannot be taken as proof of it being negated by reasoning. Thupten Jinpa summarises, this is sort of going to encapsulate the meaning here. The point being made here is this. Although the two above statements, Dharmadhata sees a form and a substantially real Dharmadhata sees a form, share many common features, they differ in a philosophically significant way. The first is a statement made only within the framework of an ordinary use of language, only made within the framework of an ordinary use of language. That's my parents called him Ross, and Ross functioning as Ross on that basis, etc. While the second is clearly making an essentialist metaphysical assertion, which is that it is a substantially real Dharmadhata, Dharma, that sees a form. It's making a claim about how Dharmadhata exists in real terms. So the last sentence means that when we engage in an ultimate analysis of the table, we are not searching, emphasizing that not, we are not searching for whether or not the table, as established in ordinary everyday terms, is findable, locatable, but rather, and this distinction is absolutely critical, whether the table appearing to exist from its own side is findable when searched for among the base of the designation of the table or elsewhere. This is because the notion that a table does exist from its own side or might exist from its own side is what Jinpa has called, in reference to contemporary Western philosophical traditions, an essentialist metaphysical claim. As such, and in those very precise terms, it can be examined and tested. So we can make a metaphysical investigation, but precisely within those terms. So again, when we conventionally establish a conventionally established table, we are not seeking to determine whether or not it can be found under the lens of an ultimate analysis. That is to say, a table established within the framework of an ordinary use of language is not the target of an ultimate analysis, which is exclusively focused on examining whether or not the table is existent from its own side as construed by self-grasping ignorance. This is another order of problematics entirely, and to mix the two is to create havoc, great confusion in our minds. Consequently, we need to put real effort, this is what I'm attempting to do today, and I realise I've thrown us into the deep end. We need to put real effort into sifting these two out and apart so that we don't mix them up and become confused. Tsongkhapa says, conventional knowledge refers to those types of cognitions that engage with their objects, whatever they may be, as they appear to the mind. They do not inquire into the facts about whether what is perceived exists as only as it appears to the mind, or whether it really objectively exists in such a manner. Tsongkhapa continues, thus, they are those awarenesses that engage their objects, referring to conventional awarenesses here, without analysis. Such types of cognitions are called non-analytical mind. It is not the case, however, that they do not engage in any analysis whatsoever. So we have to slightly nuance this situation again. The last point means that we can talk of a conventional analysis or an analysis engaged directly with the truth of establishing the truth or falsehood of conventionally existent things. But this is not the kind of analysis involved in what Tsongkhapa has called an ultimate analysis. An example of a conventional analysis in this sense, nuanced sense, would be whether there were other boy babies born in Broken Hill in 1954, the year of my birth, who were also named Ross by their parents. Such an inquiry, such an investigation could take the form of a survey and achieve perfectly meaningful results. Ross Moore was the only one, this Ross Moore was the only one born that year, or there were 7 other Ross Moores born in Broken Hill, even in the same month. Clearly, Ross at that time was a popular name. Thupten Jinpa, commenting on Tsongkhapa's passage just quoted, says, in the above, Tsongkhapa suggests that non-analyses here does not preclude conventional analysis, such as inquiring whether a jar is breakable, whether Tenzin goes to the market, and so on. Clearly, even within such types of discourse, there's a difference between truth and falsity. So we can establish truth and falsity in conventional terms. An example of a falsity in conventional terms would be mistaking a scarecrow in a cornfield from a distance to be a real person. Clearly, even crows make this cognitive mistake, hence the effectiveness of a scarecrow. That is the whole point. It is not the product of a specifically philosophical inquiry. Ordinary beings, in ordinary terms, can and do distinguish truth from falsity. So you might even argue here that a well-experienced crow also comes to understand that what appears as a person in the case of a scarecrow on closer investigation is a network of string, twigs, and straw made to resemble a person, and therefore they're no longer effectively deterred by a scarecrow. Possible. And magpies in Australia certainly are smart enough to do that. Tsongkhapa reminds us, and I'm now going to quote Jinpa, that in our everyday language, existence has a primary transactional value. When we talk of bean shoots growing in the field, we mean only that the shoots are protruding from the ground in the field. We do not analyse whether the sprouts have come from a cause that is identical to them or from something that is independent of the seeds, and so on. These would all be examples of an ultimate analysis. So, likewise, when my parents labelled this one Ross, they were not concerned with examining whether or not Ross inhered in his body or his mind, or both, or neither. They simply established, excuse me, in ordinary conventional terms, this person, as Ross. And on that now recognitional or historicalized, biographicalized basis, they proceeded to call this one Ross, as did other family friends and neighbours in an increasingly wider circle, as Ross circulated more and more in the world. At no point in this circulation was there discerned a pressing or an overwhelming need to explore the mode of being of Ross. Beyond this point, this limit, if you like, of conventional and transactionally workable everyday operations. Ross has gone to the shops. The car's not here. And regarding Tsongkhapa's other point that, quote, it is not the case, however, that they do not engage in any analysis whatsoever, end of quote, we can all appreciate the play entailed in researching through the hospital and state archives to identify all the other boys called Ross who were born in Broken Hill around the same time as this Ross. And then to have a giant Ross party celebration, a tribute to all of those of us called Ross. We have these, don't we? We see them all the time on social media. We see, in particular, this kind of carnivalesque romp when we have tribute conventions of hundreds of lookalike Elvises. The joke is that we all know they are not the real Elvis. And we can indeed easily analytically discern that, not least, of course, we know that the actual singing and dancing original Elvis is like dead. He died on August the 16th, 1977. Any ordinary person can tell you that. In my own immediate case, I did a quick Google search to establish that fact. Therefore, it is not possible that the real Elvis, in ordinary conventional terms, is present amongst the members of the assembled tribute Elvis band. So that's an example of a conventional analysis. Works perfectly well to establish truth from falsity in conventional terms. But the essential point to which I'm driving is that the real Elvis, in this context of the tribute party, is not referring to an intrinsically real Elvis, God forbid, but to the lack of a final authenticity of any Elvis lookalike impersonator as the real McCoy, if you'll allow me to mix my purely conventional metaphors. Only one person anchored in very specific transactional terms, geographical location, birth date, particular body-based, additionally sexed at birth as male in this case, voice timbre, etc., sexiness, fashion sense, haircut style, etc., is really Elvis. That is not to change. It is anchored in ordinary, everyday fact. Given Elvis's tormented life of drug addiction, etc., We might even wonder whether the existence of Elvis to himself, the sheer existential and biographical fact of himself, as the famous Grammy Award-winning crooner called Elvis, born from parents named Vernon and Gladys Priestley from Fulton, Mississippi, was itself a projected fantasy construction, indeed a kind of archetype of a megastar, according to the identificatory mechanics of megastardom. So what I'm getting at here is that Elvis, the real Elvis, might have even come to consider whether the Elvis that everyone else in the common world was saying, oh, Elvis, here's Elvis, was actually Elvis at all, because he's been overlaid by layers and layers of conventional superimpositions and expectations. But this still isn't getting at whether or not Elvis exists inherently from his own side. That is my point. Because this is a personal psychological question, but Elvis, in his sort of drug frenzy, might have unfortunately come to have to consider. So we haven't yet considered the departed the world of conventionalities. While considering Elvis as both man and public figure, we are simply navigating quite ordinary, commonplace identificatory structures that circulate around excessive stardom. The key point of all this, in other words, has nothing to do with how Elvis exists or existed in ultimate ontological terms. So to examine this further, we need to step into the realm of an ultimate analysis. I'm not going to do this with Elvis, as I've already bothered him enough, I suspect. But the discussion I have so far presented is enough, I hope, to enable us to put aside, that's what I've been attempting to do, put aside all the conventional issues of how a real or a fake Elvis might be known or established in ordinary conventional terms. This is not our topic of interest right now. This is because, as I've been mentioning, we now need to consider just how an ultimate analysis might be conducted. If we fail to do this, we have no likelihood whatsoever of penetrating what Shantideva means when he says acting like an apparition with no sense of self. In raising this prospect, Shantideva, raising this prospect that we might act like an apparition with no sense of self, he is not emphasizing, not asking us to somehow annul or evacuate our conventional sense of self, our legitimate existence as an I or a person, but rather, and this is what we've been leading up to all along, how we might exist in terms of an ultimate analysis, namely as utterly empty of inherent existence. I'm not saying that ultimate analysis establishes our emptiness of inherent existence, but that we can only establish our emptiness of inherent existence through the mechanism of an ultimate analysis. To understand this exceedingly subtle point concerning the distinctive operational perspective or purview of an ultimate analysis, we are required to understand what is meant by an object of negation, or sometimes it's called an object of refutation. As Shantideva says in his famous 9th chapter, quote, "When you do not touch on the right sign, you will not grasp that which is not real." So this is a reference to what is called technically the hypothetical measure of inherent existence. We're trying to measure it is, estimate what it is that we're seeking to discover is either real or not real. We're having to shape it, if you like, in order to work out whether or not it's present or not. And it's called hypothetical because we can't give a definition of the qualities of inherent existence for the simple reason that inherent existence in reality doesn't exist. So we can only give hypothetical accounts that help us understand that point. So Pabonka Rinpoche, these things become clearer because I'm going to give sort of examples and explanations. Pabonka Rinpoche says, quote, "The self is supposed to be something distinct in itself, for it is not the outcome of other conditions. It is also said to be a self-contained entity, for it is independent of anything else. It is also not the outcome of anything else." So that's sort of giving us a framework for the object of negation here. Pabonka is an excellent and easily accessible resource here. In seeking the object to be refuted and now turning, this is where we're coming right back to Shantideva's line, turning now directly to our own self, he asks, quote, "We must investigate the way we instinctively grasp at the I that is supposed, hypothetical, supposed to be established by its very nature. When we investigate how the I instinctively appears to the mind and just how the mind grasps the I, we find that we feel this I is not merely something our mind imputes upon the set of aggregates. It is established along with this set. Such instinctive grasping at the I is to be found even in the mind streams of ants, in the deepest recesses of their mind, or even in their dreams." A very remarkable and also very beautiful passage talking about the dreams of ants, the dark, the inner recesses of an ant's mind. But the essential point here is that the innate self-grasping ignorance that's projecting an innately existent self of person is not in any way whatsoever the product of learnt philosophical or religious or any other kinds of belief systems. It arises through the force of deep habituation from the past association with the innate mind of ignorance in our previous life, and in our previous life, etc. It can be terminated through wisdom realizing emptiness, but if we trace it back to beginningless mind, we can't find an original moment when that ignorance first got up and running. Pabonka elaborates, this instinctive form of grasping at the I is something we have always had in our mind streams, even when dreaming. As long as we do not meet with particular circumstances, we will not be clear on how the I appears to this instinctive type of self-grasping. So he's now going to give an example of when we can maybe get some sense of how it appears. The I, however, manifests clearly when there are powerful conditions for you to be happy or sad, such as when you are praised or criticized. Suppose someone accuses you of being a thief, and this makes you upset. Great hostility arises within you, and you feel, I am not guilty of this. You say, That's the last straw. You cannot refute the accusation on the spot. You're up against an adversary calling you a liar, and you lose control of yourself. This, of course, only reinforces, says Pabonka, the accusation that you are a thief. The grounds for your stating, I'm not guilty, I'm not guilty, I'm not guilty, rises vividly out of the very center of your heart in all its glory. Pabonka says, this is the way the object of refutation will reveal itself or present itself to you. Whenever this thinking manifests in any circumstances, making you glad, afraid, happy, or sad, and wherever this instinctive grasping develops strongly, you must examine on the spot the way it appears to you. This is a remarkable, direct pith meditational instruction. We meditate on the spot because I mightn't be on my cushion when someone calls me a thief. I might be in a shopping aisle. And it's at that moment, because I'm in a shopping aisle and I'm not a thief, and someone's calling me a thief and they're threatening to get the police, that this indignant sense of, I am not a thief, rises up with an overwhelming force. That is the perfect moment to investigate how that I is appearing or to exist, according to innate self-grasping ignorance. So in the texts, and including Pabonka, we find many, many very detailed instructions on this point of how to meditate at this moment. But the analogy is often given of two people traveling side by side. And you're on a mountain path and you're traveling side by side, and you're aware of the presence of the other person through the corner of your eye. You're not directly looking at them because you're looking at the path, but you're aware and you're maintaining awareness of your companion. So this subtle awareness of what the main mind is doing, which is the innate self-grasping mind, which is hallucinating this self-existent, self-evident, self-arising, independent I, peeps in on that scene and tries to see how it appears. Pabonka, while the mind continues to act instinctively, so we don't interrupt it, and while the object to be refuted presents itself to you, so it's still presenting it to you, I am not a thief, this I feelingness, if you like, is continuing unabated, that's when you examine. If this mind, examining the mode of appearance of the I, is too strong, and this is getting back to the two people on the path analogy, you will lose this grip on the part of the I, and this part will become unclear. So if you try too hard to seize the object of negation in that moment, we interrupt the manifestation of it. Non-existent object can still appear, even though in reality it doesn't exist. Its image can exist. Anyway, so if we try too hard, we've kind of crushed the continuum of the instinctive arising and we lose the opportunity to investigate how it's appearing. That's the point. We sort of scare away the crows by throwing a stone. Thus, it is vital, says Pabonka, to examine the I skillfully. And he concludes, in this process, while you're looking into exactly how the I instinctively appears to you, the I may present itself in a number of ways. Sometimes the I may be something imputed on the body, sometimes on the mind. This is not the genuine way the I presents itself to the instinctive grasping of the I. The body and the mind, which are the bases of imputation, as well as the person, the imputed phenomena, all merge into one broad set. The self-evident I plainly appears to be something more than the idea imputed on this set. Pabonka says, it appears instead to be something established as being self-contained, a distinct unit on its own. If the I seems to be like this, you have rightly perceived the way the object to be reputed appears to you. Once recognized, it is easy to refute. So this is really, really crucial to take on board. And it's said that it's necessary to spend many months or years, if you like, gaining a correct identification of the object of negation of ourself in this way, in order to then effectively refute it. And the analogy is often given of a target. If we don't know where the eye of the target is, we can't expect to strike it with our arrow. In the same way, if we don't know what the object of refutation precisely is, we can't expect to strike it with an analytical ultimate analysis. So Pabonka says, he acknowledges the difficulty, the key point is a subtle one. It is a mistake to take it too far and at other times not far enough. If you do not identify the object of refutation, it will always present itself to you. When you try to identify it, it stays hidden among the set of the body and mind, and you cannot find it. He's telling us of a problem here that happens in our search. If we try intellectually to set up our object of negation and then look for it, if you like, it will stay, our real object of negation, the instinctive appearance of an innate self, I, will remain hidden somewhere in our set of body and mind. And if we don't try to locate it or identify it, it will constantly appear because it's innately appearing through the force of ignorance. I'm not using innate there as inherently existing innate, but through the force of habituation based on continuing ignorance, it's continuously presenting itself to us. The moment we turn to see it, it slips away into the ground of the aggregates. So that's why we have to somehow gain a very, very subtle inquiring mind that is able to peep in on the scene of the appearance of the innate I without disrupting the continuum of that manifestation or that production. And so Lama Yeshe, for example, in his Mahamudra commentary, talks of the mindfulness fish swimming in the water. We sort of dart around inside the water, in the lucid water, without creating any ripples or waves. That sort of minute agility that a small fish has to circle a larger fish is exactly the kind of mind that we're attempting to approach the object of negation with, if you like. Now, I'm just going to share here a few passages which, in my own experience, I found incredibly valuable for understanding the object of refutation, or attempting to understand the object of refutation. Pabonka gives an example of a horse. This is what is happening. When you go for a gallop on a horse, you do not mean the horse's mind or the body when you say horse. Horse is merely a name imputed on the set of both of them. You apprehend the horse to be a self self-evident thing covered by the term horse. When you speak of Sarah or Drepung, referring to the monasteries, you are not distinguishing between the external buildings, such as the main temples and the monks, etc., that are inside them. The base of imputation is the collection of the physical environments of these monasteries together with their contents. Over, Rinpoche Lamak Kabje always says, on top of this collection will arise the self-evident, all-embracing thing covered by the words Drepung or Sarah. This, again, is what is happening. This is fascinating, isn't it? Because if we extend the boundary of Sarah by taking in extra land, we then superimpose Sarah on top of that expanded base, and it now appears as existent from its own side. When we talk of a scholar, the basis of imputation is merely the set of her mind or his mind and body, but something self-evident and quite independent of anything else presents itself to you. This is key. Vonka says, in short, as Ketsang Jampoyang says in his prayer, any phenomena is going to be termed this or that, referring to cup, table, wind, time, hope, etc., etc. Any phenomenon is going to be called a this or a that. This or that overlaps the basis of imputation and presents itself as if it existed in its own right. This is why, and often in other commentaries, you see it says it presents itself back towards us, if you like, as though from there. This is the ultimate object of refutation by logic, by ultimate analysis. We haven't lost that thread. It has been described as the thing to which you direct your grasping at true existence, or as the object of negation that is supposed to be established as true when one does not recognize that it only appears to be true. So we're turning now, still got some energy, I hope, to my opening introduction to today's class. If we don't correctly identify the object of negation, we run the risk of using logic to refute either too much, leading to nihilism, meaning we refute things that conventionally exist, or too little. We refute something, but we don't refute what actually has to be refuted, which is the object of negation, which means that we are actually re-reifying, re-essentializing things, although claiming to be refuting them, because we haven't identified what it is that we're refuting. Pabonka, if we perform an ultimate analysis on this fuzzy basis, we will entirely miss the target. I mention this here because the following analysis, or its equivalent, is often put forward by students, Western students, who have not carefully ascertained the object of negation that is to be refuted by meaning. And I'm going to give Pabonka's example, but I have my experience of this. I went away with a friend and some friends actually to a beach hut on the ocean. We had a detailed late night Majamika investigation. We're all students of Kabje Zopa Rinpoche and His Holiness and so forth, Geshe Doga. And my friend explained that the emptiness of a milk carton. So I'll come back to that, milk container. I'll get back to that, but I'll firstly read Pabonka's account. For example, the convention of a pot is entirely familiar to you. So you might say, the mouth is not the pot. The base of the pot is not the pot, and so on. Eliminating each part of the pot, and finally, slavishly meditating on the emptiness of not being able to find the pot anymore. So we dismantle, we're looking for the clock. We haven't identified the object of negation that we're actually looking for. We're instead analysing the conventional existing clock. So we take away the face of the clock, the arms of the clock, the numbers of the clock, the machinery of the clock, the assembly of the clock, etc., etc. And lo and behold, there's no clock. And then, the clock is empty. That is not a realization of the emptiness of the clock. It is a conventional analysis pushed to an absurd extreme, because no one is going to claim that a part of a clock is a clock. It's just not. It's just simply a part, so I call it a part. We know it's not a clock. When they put the parts together and they work, and it's a successful base, we put the label on top. Yes, we have a clock. Here's the clock. Thanks. I needed a clock. No problem. So, but this way, referring to this reductive, atomistic, if you like, breaking down of a thing into its ever increasingly refined parts to search for whether or not the big thing that started out to be still exists somehow, is not what we mean by an alternate analysis. Pabonka says, you will still lack the precision to properly refute the object of refutation on the basis of that particular emptiness, that one that, the clock isn't to be found if we search amongst its parts in that way. And so you destroy the conventionality of the pot and fall into complete nothingness. This emptiness you have imagined, imagine's an important word there, is on the wrong track. A lot of scientists, by the way, currently use this kind of reading of Nagarjuna's analyses to create a kind of similarity between quantum physics. I'm not saying they all do, between quantum physics and emptiness, shunyata, but they are not doing it through the lens of understanding an ultimate analysis. They're mistaking this conventional reductionism as a kind of a Madhyamika analysis, and that is a very large and quite prevalent mistake. So the crunch here is at doing such a reductive analysis, searching for the pot, merely imputed pot in this case, is bound not to find the clock. So we're now speaking in conventional terms. If we break it down and look for the clock amongst its parts, we're bound not to find it. Why not? Because the clock is merely imputed to the parts. The clock has never existed from the side of the parts. So anyway, that's a very interesting point. So the merely imputed pot is not the object of negation, just as the merely labelled I is not the object of negation when searching for the self of a person. Therefore, when we seek to engage in an ultimate analysis of a self of persons, we do need to comprehend the significance of Tsongkhapa's 4 key points. I'm just going to touch on these. The first point, and this is our point, the first point is what is to be refuted. The second, determining the full set of possibilities. Thirdly, determining that they are not truly the same. And fourthly, that they are not truly different. Of the second point, determining the full set of probabilities, Babonka says, as we've just heard, a correct mental image born of first-hand experience of the object may appear clearly to the mind's eye. This is the object of refutation. If such an eye, the thing being instinctively grasped at, were in fact established by its nature, it would necessarily be established as being either one or different from the basis of designation, case of the person, the aggregates. This is the crunch. There is no third possibility other than these two. The key point should lead you to the certainty that if it is neither of these two, it cannot exist. Babonka, you must meditate on this key point, not merely for a day or two, but until you gain an unshakable conviction in it. So it's on this basis, these two steps, that we then investigate to find out whether or not Ross is findable, inherently findable Ross, inherently existent Ross is findable in his aggregates. And if he's not, we go through all the bits looking for them. The only option left is apart from his aggregates. And again, we analyze and explore. We can't find Ross there either. So we're left with the perhaps devastating realization that this innately existent Ross does not in the slightest exist at all. So to sum up, as quoted by Pabonka Rinpoche, the Venerable Losang Choki Geltsen said, the way things now present themselves to us ordinary beings is nothing but the way the object to be refuted through logic would appear to us. All the consciousnesses within the mind streams of ordinary beings have been affected by ignorance. Because of this, any object that appears to us seems to be true. And Pabonka glosses, that is, at the precise moment, or at this precise, at the moment, all phenomena, all things that appear to us, the self, the aggregates, Mount Meru, houses, etc., present themselves to us ordinary people in such a way that their appearance is mixed with an appearance of is a mix of relative truth and true existence. So we have no way of dividing things into those that appear to exist truly and those that do not exist truly. Everything appears to exist truly. And so the way everything it presents itself on the mind appears to us without exception to be mixed with the object of refutation. You see here how careful we are being, Bonga's being. When he says mixed, we are now able to leave that part of the mixture, which is the conventionally appearing Ross, undamaged by our search, because we're not actually analysing whether or not that one exists, but we're trying to estimate that portion of that appearance which is appearing in a particularly distorted way through the force of ignorance as an inherently existent Ross. The problem is, as Pabonka is saying, it's a cognitive one. In reality, experientially, they're mixed together. And so we have to sort of be able to think them apart, if you like, by understanding clearly what an object of negation is. So this is the crunch. So we have no way of dividing things into those that appear to exist truly and those that do not appear to exist truly. Everything appears to exist truly. Thus, the way things appear to us is the way the object of negation appears, or, if you like, the way things established as true would appear. Leave it at that, because it is futile to seek the object of refutation elsewhere. Junkyo Rinpoche Dorje said, "A few of us with clearer minds cling to slogans such as self-contained and established as true. Yet, they seem to think that a thing to be refuted is something with horns on its head. Emptiness is not said to stand out as plainly as a woman's unveiled face. If you do too much talking and do not hit the target to be refuted, I fear the woman will run away." And Pabonka quotes Junkyo Rinpoche Dorje, "You do not have to search for it. The thing, O seeker, is within you." End of quote. So this means we must look within ourselves to determine just how the I, that is the object of innate self-grasping ignorance, experientially appears and is instinctively grasped as the real I, speaking now not in relative, but in absolute terms of innate existence. This is precisely what an ultimate analysis does, and it's how it discovers that the object of negation cannot be found in either of these two places, which, if it were to exist, it would have to be. So again, we're to remind ourselves that what an ultimate analysis discovers when the object of negation cannot be found in either of the two places in which it must subsist, if it is to exist at all. So this is precisely what an ultimate analysis discovers, if it is to exist at all. Can't be found in either of the two places. Again, we're reminded that this in no way concerns how the world exists, in the words of Tsongkhapa, at the level of the unexamined natural awareness. Just referring to our ordinary, everyday, conventional consciousness says, "Oh, here's Ross, come in," etc., etc. That's, in terms of this account, regarded as a natural, unexamined awareness, because we're not doing ontological, metaphysical investigation. So the conclusion for our immediate purposes, and I apologize for the brevity of my account. I mean, I've had to cover a lot of very, very difficult points very, very swiftly. When the self-supporting, inherently existent I, that is the object of refutation, is conclusively discoverable as not findable in either of these two ways, in the aggregates or apart from them, we are forced to the conclusion that it does not exist at all. This is an astonishing and even shocking discovery. It is said that for those with a familiarization with emptiness in a past lifetime, or maybe a lot of experience in this lifetime, it will come as an ecstatic homecoming. And for those who are approaching or falling into this realization for the first time, it may come as a moment of primordial fear, because it appears that the I to which we have clung and believed in as real from beginningless time is suddenly revealed or exposed as utterly non-existent. Pabonka relates a famous anecdote describing such a meditator. Quote, "The I is the subject of your clinging to at an I through instinctive grasping. But you have achieved the Madhyamika view from the time you feel the I is not something that can, for example, be seen with the eye or held in the hand, or when the eye appears to be completely hollow and again gain vivid certainty that it does not exist. At this point, the sharp-witted, owing to their great familiarity with the subject, feel they have discovered something precious. The dull-witted become afraid because they have suddenly lost a most precious thing. This, however, does no harm. And I remember Kabje Zopa Rinpoche mentioning this on one of the retreats at Atisha Center. He said if one somehow wonderfully manages to find oneself on that precipice, this I that I've been clinging to as a real I doesn't exist. He says, as that fear arises, to push on, because perhaps never before in samsaric time have we arrived at that uniquely powerful precipice, to go over which means that we've generated a realization of emptiness for the first time. So to stop at that moment through some sort of emotional turmoil would be regretful. So this is why we need a whole context of understanding of why we're meditating and how we're meditating, so that we will be prepared if these kinds of experiences arise. Anyway, Pabonka's story. Once while Jay Rinpoche was giving a discourse on the view in Sarah Choding Hermitage, Sherab Sengay realized the view and became afraid, grabbing the lapel of his donka, his monk shirt. Jay Rinpoche understood what had happened, and this made him happy. The fellow from Natang, Jay Rinpoche said, has discovered relative truth in his lapel, meaning that he'd sort of fallen into voidness and then had panicked and then was clutching his clothes to try to reestablish his presence. And that's what Rinpoche was referring to as discovering relative truth in his lapel. So there's also a story about Nolchu Togme Sangpo. When he gave a discourse on the view, some of his disciples became terrified. So there are two features to this realization of emptiness. Pabonka. In other words, we gain vivid certainty that it doesn't exist. This realization should have two features. It should be unshakable in its certainty that the object of refutation does not exist by nature. And as for what is appearing to you at that time, there should be a complete emptiness that is a mere negation of there being any establishment of this object of refutation as something true. Retain this certainty without forgetting it and always pursue it. So in technical terms, we call this realization of the object, which is the emptiness, a non-affirming negative or a non-implicative negation. This is because for that meditator, at that moment in meditation, nothing other than the sheer unfindability of the object of negation appears. The meditator at this time is therefore not even able to conceptualize or describe the event. I am experiencing emptiness now. This means, of course, that if we think we've stumbled upon a realization of emptiness and are sitting there in meditation thinking, wow, this is what emptiness looks like, then it is clear that we are not realizing emptiness. because we're indulging or engaging in conceptual elaborations, which is incompatible with a complete emptiness that is a mere negation of there being any establishment of the object of refutation as something true, as Pabonka put it. If we stop to think for a moment, we can see what our opening statement meant when we said that conventional things or conventionalities are not established by an ultimate cognizer. This is going right back to the beginning of the presentation today. It's because only a conventional cognizer, not engaged in realization of emptiness, can do that, establish various things via a medium of conceptual imputation, nominate or posit their existence, in other words. So we need to carefully and realistically assess the status of our hopefully correct realization along the lines proposed by Pabonka. Anyway, when we arise out of meditation, and therefore we are no longer in contact, or in that state of being absorbed in a non-affirming negation, meaning that nothing else has been suggested in its place. When you after meditating, when you examine what is left after the remnants of the negation of the object to be refuted, among the remnants of the object of negation to be refuted, doing this while not in absorption, all that seems to remain, it's talking about having got up off a cushion after realizing emptiness of self or person, all that seems to remain is the mere I. This is merely the conventional I. Always bear in mind the certainty that this merely conventional I is what accumulates virtuous and non-virtuous karma as if in an illusion. And that on this type of I, this illusion-like I, will ripen such black and white karmic results. So Shantideva in chapter 9 says, verse 5, when ordinary folk perceive phenomena, they look upon them as real and not illusory. This then is the subject of debate, where ordinary and meditators differ. So we aim to become meditators so that we can supersede in this respect the common views of ordinary people. And we can reach the realizational conclusion as Shantideva describes, verse 74, 9th chapter. For instance, when we take the banana trees, cutting through the fibers, finding nothing, likewise, analytical investigation will find no I, no underlying self. Shantideva also says in verse 54, afflictive passion and the veils of ignorance, the cure for these is emptiness. Therefore, how could they not meditate upon it? Who wish swiftly to attain omniscience? How can they who swiftly wish to attain omniscience not meditate upon it? 55. Whatever is the source of pain and suffering, let that be the object of our fear, not fear of emptiness, fear of that ordinary pain. But voidness will allay our every sorrow. How could it be for us a thing of dread? So this is answering a question from several weeks ago in relation to the topic of being empty is perhaps a bit scary. To the contrary, it is the deepest, most profound source of hopefulness. I'm going to finish on this. Excuse me. We're not going to talk about dread anymore, but we're going to talk about a profoundly achieved hopefulness, an unshakable and very energetic, dynamic optimism. His Holiness, the Dalai Lama says, since the grasping to the self is not fundamental to the nature of the mind, it is possible to become free of it. There is no other cause for achieving nirvana other than meditation on selflessness. All other methods, such as love, compassion, and so forth, cannot oppose the grasping itself. Thus, the state of peaceful nirvana, or the stage of peaceful nirvana, cannot be achieved by them. End of quote. What we're left with then is the great task, realizing the actual reality of things by developing that advanced tool that is penetrating wisdom. Only this can destroy what His Holiness has explained as all reference points of solidity, and thereby, along with this, the total elimination of all objects of grasping pertaining to the apprehensions of I and mine. So this is how we understand the absolute freedom of operation, the spontaneously vast, open, performative space that a direct meditative absorption on emptiness would allow. I'm not speaking from experience here, but I'm trying to map out the terrain so that we have a clear idea of where we are and what we're doing at any given point in time of our journey into this topic. This freedom has been poetically invoked by Padampa Sangye, as quoted by the first Panchen Lama in his Geluk Kagyu Mahamudra text. I quote, within a state of voidness, the lance of awareness is to be twirled around. A correct view of reality is not a tangible obstruction, O people of Dingri. And then the Panchen Lama mentions all such statements come to the same intended point. He continues. His Holiness glosses and continues. No matter what arises now in our mind, we understand simply because of the fact of its appearing as this or that it exists as such by virtue simply of circumstances. I'll read again. No matter what appears now in our mind, we understand, this is incumbent on the realization of emptiness, simply because of this fact appearing to our mind as this or that it exists as such by virtue simply of circumstances, causes, conditions, parts, and particularly being posited through conceptual designation. In other words, yes, when this happens, then, while remaining focused on the sphere of voidness, we have the lance of our awareness of non-inherent existence twirl around. A correct view is not a tangible obstruction that can be impeded. It applies to everything. So that's quite a remarkable passage. So that absolutely open freedom then is also emerging as a realization that things exist in this merely imputed way. And because of innate self-grasping, they nonetheless come back to us as inherently existent, but we now know that that appearance is completely false. thus we see them as illusion-like. So I have got material prepared for the next 3 verses of Shantideva, so you might have wondered whether or not I was ever going to get onto them, but I was aware that these particular classes we've been having together, and which we've attended so sort of carefully and enthusiastically, and for that I really appreciate your support. I thought they're called supplementary classes, but I have found myself supplementing the supplement. But I think you'll forgive me, because in this context of the supplementary course, we do have this freedom perhaps to move around a little bit more, like that little small fish perhaps that Lama Yeshe was referring to in the Mahamudra text. So there's a bit of freedom, a bit of playfulness there. But that said, we're going to continue in a very resolute fashion with the verses that are to come, which are going to deal with the problem of attachment to our body and how our afflictions are often generated because of this attachment, intense attachment, and also how we create many problems because we regard this body as mine, but not just mine, but mine really. So this is the sort of basis of our incredibly intense bodily attachment. And it's also the reason for the fear that may occur at death time when we realize we're going to be separated from this physical mass. So these Madhyamika analyses that I've been explaining or attempting to present today have a huge impact on these moments of experience, because we're able to see them differently as a result of our meditational journey. So we'll now recite the dedication prayers. Excuse me, I'm just trying to find them. Yeah, sorry about that. Shantideva. For as long as space endures, and for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. May all the pains of all living creatures ripen solely upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings, which are the sole source of medicine for suffering and the origin of every joy, be materially supported and honoured and abide for a very long time. I prostrate to Manjughosha, through whose kindness wholesome minds ensure, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel, bodhicitta, that has not arisen, arise and grow, and may that which has arisen never diminish, but increase more and more. May my Venerable Lama's life be firm, his white divine actions spread in the 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Long life prayer for His Holiness, Dalai Lama. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until cyclic existence is ended. So also make very strong prayers from our heart for the return, our quick return of our precious Kabje Zopa Rinpoche. So thank you very much.